From All Angles, live interactive talk shows as we discuss and explore matters impacting on our environment, tourism, education, agriculture, health, manufacturing, social issues, and lots more. From All Angles.
Good evening and welcome to this week's edition of From All Angles. From the earliest of recorded times, whenever people were given assignments, they tended to be given some support, some guidelines. Somebody tended to look at them and say, well, I think you probably are suited for the job, or if you're not, let's make you suited for this assignment. You remember some of the early instructions. You know, if you go back to Genesis, somebody put us there and said, you are to tend this garden. Somebody later on said to us, go ye forth and multiply. And they gave us the tools to do that job. And somebody later on said, you are your brother's keeper. And they gave us a brain and a conscience and a mind to think through these things. And I guess over time, we've kind of developed our skills and expertise in these areas and have managed to populate the world to over 6 billion and have managed, and sometimes to look after each other and sometimes not so well in that regard. This evening, I guess you're wondering where we're going with this. Well, where we're going with this is us, human beings. Some people call us now human capital. I don't so like that term myself, but we're going to even explore that issue. But how do we prepare ourselves for the tasks at hand? How have people prepared themselves and done well? How have others prepared themselves and not done so well? What is it we can learn from others who've been involved in issues relating to what we almost flippantly call human resource development, when in fact it is actually about the single most important investment that a country or a firm or a family can make? We are very, very, very fortunate this week with the kind support, interest, and investment of the National Bank of Dominica. We've got someone with us who's actually brought such a wealth of experience on this matter of human resource development that I'm sure they're always really just going to be a trickle of what we could do with Dr. Michael Marquardt. I want to welcome you, Michael. Can I call you Michael?
Yes, call me Michael.
Absolutely, because the last name I might end up calling you a pint or more fluid hogs. So let's if you don't mind.
I'll be fine.
Okay. So it's Dr. Michael Marquardt, and that will be the last time I hope I say that last name.
Okay.
But Michael brings a tremendous amount of experience in terms of training of persons all over the world, corporations, governments. So I am personally extremely excited by your being here, because I have lots of questions that I want to sort of put to you,
Good.
which I think our viewers would be interested in your responses on. So welcome again. Thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure to be here in Dominica.
Okay. And, his able guide and confidant and assistance and support, Mr. Mourillon, now with the National Bank, and I think, can I say your new title?
Sure.
Human Resource Development.
That's right, an organization.
An organization at the National Bank. We had a wonderful conversation a few weeks ago, and thanks so much for coming back and for bringing Michael with you. We're going to take a break for a word from the sponsors, and when we come back, we're going to go straight into our conversation this evening, which is in fact about us, about human resource development, what it is, what we think it is, what Michael thinks it is, and actually how important it is for whatever it is we want to engage in. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors who make the program possible. See you shortly.
Increased local programming on Marpent Channel 5. Tune in daily from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. for local and regional.
This time goes really, really
arts,
quickly.
Entertainment, talk shows, comedy, news and current affairs, plus your favorite programs from our archives. Marpent, programming with you in mind.
Welcome back, and we begin our conversation with Michael on human resource issues and human resource development issues. But before, let's find out a little bit about you. I mean, there's no such thing as a little bit about you from what I have read, but what would you say to somebody who asks, what do you do for a living, Michael?
Well, I do many things for a living. I'm first and foremost, I'm a professor at George Washington University in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
I've been a professor there for 15 years.
Yeah.
in the area of human resource development, the area in which I received my doctorate. I guess I'm most proud of being a grandfather these days.
There you go.
I have 6 grandchildren who are the future.
Wow.
And I enjoy immensely helping them to learn, encouraging them to ask questions of their grandfather.
Notice you travel a lot, with them, or they travel with you.
Whenever possible, we try to travel with them.
Okay.
Occasionally, my wife, who's a medical doctor, travels with me, and she loves to go scuba diving and snorkeling, so I hope to bring her with me the next time I come.
I was going to say, you have to bring her here. This is one of the top 5 dive destinations in the world.
That's very good to hear.
Absolutely. Okay, and but I noticed from the brief bio that was shared with me by Mr. Mourillon, you've done some fascinating things in not just teaching HR and training people, but not just the numbers, which are quite astounding, but the firms, the corporations. Some of them are actually way up there. I mean, very large, readily recognizable corporations. And I'm wondering, how did they do in the face of this crisis? And, you know, was your involvement with them an important, critical factor that kind of helped keep them going and focused? And maybe we could start our conversation there.
Well, I think most organizations around the world are facing a very severe crisis, financial meltdown, and so forth. And I think, unlike previous recessions, depressions, and so forth, organizations recognize the critical importance of training their staff, maintaining their best people, and providing training and not cutting that particular operational activity in an organization. In the past, it was a belief that training or leadership development was something that was nice to have but not essential. And I think in a highly competitive global environment, most of the large corporations now recognize that developing their best people and retaining their best people is critical for their long-term success. So I've worked most recently with a large number of organizations, Microsoft, Samsung, Wells Fargo Bank, Goodrich. And as you noted from my background, most recently I've moved into an area called action learning. I have found over the 40 years in which I've been involved in human resource development, one of the most powerful ways that I have found to help organizations solve their problems and at the same time develop their people is this methodology
Let's
called
talk a
action
little
learning.
about it. I was fascinated by it because actually Ban Ki-moon just used a term that's quite similar as he was urging people around this UN General Assembly. He said, we need to move from knowledge to action.
Right.
Now, what's action learning?
Well, action learning, very simply described, is when a group of people have the ability to learn while they're taking action.
Okay.
Most training is where the learning occurs and then later on people do the action. Or there's action but no learning taking place. And we know from understanding how children learn, the most powerful way that humans learn is to act their way into learning, as opposed to learn and then act.
Right.
And so a child, by the age of 2, a child could speak 5 or 6 different languages because they act their way into learning. They have an experience and they grow from it. They learn how to walk not by someone telling them how to walk. They experience it, do some internal reflection, and keep improving and learning very rapidly. So action learning is the recognition that the most powerful way to learn is to have an experience and then to reflect on it, ask about it, and then develop further skills or knowledge or competency based upon that. So that's kind of a brief description. And I first discovered action learning about 15 years ago. I had worked in the corporate world for 30 years, worked in about 60 countries all over the world, and I was asked to be a professor at George Washington University. And one of the first courses I was asked to teach was this course called Action Learning.
So you had to figure it out.
I had to figure it out. Try to stay ahead of the students. But I got fascinated and excited by Action Learning. I wished I had discovered it 30 or 40 years earlier when I had done all this HR programs around the world.
Let me bring in an action man here, Mr. Mourillon. I mean, You know, you haven't ever shared a recent CV of yours with me, but I happen to know quite a bit about it.
Okay.
From earlier times. So here's a man. You're a man who's been involved, did hands-on stuff. You wrote some really interesting pieces, and I remember you did a piece even on Pan, did you not? Long time ago.
Very long.
Yes, a very long time ago. And but what causes you to bring Michael here at this time?
Okay, well, the first thing, let me say that I have been in a number of positions in organizations and also as a freelance consultant looking at companies. One of the things that always stumped me was that no matter how good the consultancy you do, no matter how much you create options and solutions for a company, 10 years later it's somewhere catching dust. People don't even remember that you did it.
That's correct.
I got very concerned about this move from having studied a problem, having come up with solutions and putting it into action. That was one. The second thing I found out too is that as a regional consultant in traveling, my favorite pastime is just to ask taxi drivers questions and ask bar people questions.
Of course.
And I'm always astounded that they have solutions. I mean, things we're grappling with, these guys give me answers. And I always ask them, how is it you know? And the people who are supposed to be in charge of this don't seem to know. So when I met Mike at George Washington in a doctoral program, and he laid this on, I said, wow, this thing looks like it will bridge the gap that I'm looking at.
Okay.
And then I tried it on a small scale in terms of what I knew about it. I actually have an exercise where I do team building, and I try to get the teams to do an exercise to prove that they have achieved some synergy.
Okay.
And I have an index where I measure how they did before and how they did after. And I just tried out just a small sample of the work on a group in terms of having them do the questioning before. And for some reason, well, I guess Mike will tell you why, it significantly improved their ability to solve the problem, to stick with it, solve it, and feel good about having solved it at the end. So now that I am at the National Bank, I think at the last program I did mention that I find that we have a lot of talent in there. I mean, the National Bank, unlike the other banks, we hire the talent, the best that we can find on the market, the best kids coming out of school, people with, all the high grades and so. But that is, you can't leverage that unless you can find a way to harness it and make those minds come together and produce the winning solutions.
And you're finding that this is something that you can actually do with adults, that you can work with adults and get them to make that transition through that learning mechanism.
Well, yes. And if you ask about our experience,
we're going to find out.
in this week, and you will see that it is possible. And then I guess our job now it's how do you sustain it? Because then you have the same situation. The consultant comes, does it, and then how do you keep it at the local level? Building from strength to strength.
So, Mike, in as succinct a way as you might, because we do have a time constraint. Why does it work, and how does it work?
Well, it works because it's built upon, I think, what is deepest inside all of human nature, as well as how adults learn. And we know that what enables most of us to learn, or causes us to learn, is that we have a problem or an important goal that we want to accomplish. And if we know we have to learn something to accomplish that goal or overcome that particular obstacle, we learn. And so if you can create a situation in which learning is essential to achieve that goal or knowledge, learning goes very quickly. So for example, if I'm going to be going to France next month and be there by myself, I'm going to take my French lessons a little more seriously, and I'll probably learn a lot more. But if I'm learning French in school and I'm not ever going to use it, we don't learn.
There's no big driver behind
no big
you.
driver. So there has to be an urgent goal or problem. I think a second thing which makes learning work is that we know how adults learn and how children learn, and the most effective, quickest way for people to learn is through questions. Began back in Socrates, but people learn best from questions, either questions addressed to them, or even better, questions addressed to yourself. And so there's a lot of psychological, sociological research showing that if you can create an urgent problem and have either an individual or a group use questions to develop the ability to handle that problem or reach that goal, they will learn 100 times faster than any other method.
Which would explain why children learn very fast, because they are always asking, why daddy, why mommy, why should I do that, what is this, where are we going, are we there yet? It's all a series of questions that engages them with the experience they're having, is that right? So you're telling me that you're applying that methodology and you're already beginning to see some things happen?
Yes, well,
with your people?
We embarked on the program yesterday, and already the team's working, and the fascinating thing is it doesn't have to be any group that has worked together before.
Right.
Could be the first time you're pulling these people together. It doesn't matter the rank of the people in the group. Once they use the process, they get insights that they wouldn't normally sit there and get on their own usually.
Is it about teaching listening as well? That you're not just asking questions, but listening to other people's experiences and responses, and how much of that is it?
Well, we know that all the greatest inventions in the world came because the inventor asked a question that no one had asked before. So the greater the question, the greater the learning and the greater the action. Now, in order to ask a good question, a great question, requires you have to listen carefully either to the person you're working with or listen to the environment. And so that's what children do. When they see something, they ask a great question, like one grandchild asked me, why don't the clouds fall? That's right. Because they see, they listen, and they ask a question. And so there is a direct correlation between the quality of the question, which is based upon the listening, the quality of the reflection that occurs from the question, the quality of learning, and the quality of action. So great questions always lead to great learning and great actions.
Absolutely. I remember many years ago, a former minister, it's passed on, W.S. Stevens, Minister of Education, gave me a book to read, and it was The Art of Listening. And then when I spoke with him after that, he said, okay, what questions do you have for me now? You know, he was an extraordinary individual. Most people actually didn't seem to appreciate, his level of insight.
Yes.
Here he was talking to a very young person.
But one thing though, I don't know if I want to cut that.
Sure, go ahead.
There. One of the things, and even the participants, one or two, at the break say, hey, this is different. This is a different way of working. Because one of the things it does not allow you to do, it doesn't allow you to grandstand in there. So, sometimes we make the mistake of thinking that the most eloquent person, the most verbose person is the person with the answer, and very often we're wrong.
Absolutely, most of the time.
In other words, I don't know if we should say the rules here, in the sense,
absolutely,
in the sense that in that group, you can't say anything unless you're asking a question or you're answering a question.
Sure.
So you have to be answering a specific question. You can't just stay in grandstand and give a speech.
Right.
You see, because everything must be towards, leading towards the solution of the problem. So.
Are the circumstances that, let's say, your company is confronted with, or other companies and countries confronted with, changing so rapidly nowadays that different questions need to be asked, or are the same questions still relevant to the changing conditions?
I think that in today's environment, questions are even more critical because the environment is much more complex. With global competition and technology and speed of change and so forth, the old ways of trying to understand a problem or solve a problem, or the old ways of learning fairly slowly, are no longer effective. And organizations can no longer operate with that way of learning or that way of making change. And so we're realizing that you have to use a process in which more people are engaged in asking questions about the system so you can understand it and develop strategies from it. So I think some of the questions that were asked 1,000 years ago remain appropriate, such as why or why not, and why do you always do it this way, and so forth. But there are different types of questions where we have to get questions that encourage more creativity, questions that search for one's intuition, questions that cause a group of people to reflect rather than just an individual, because the complexity requires better competency internally. And so I think the types of questions, who is engaged in the questions, are different today.
Have you noticed, Michael, and certainly for you, Val, over the years, do people with a public sector background, a long civil service background, government background, react any differently to this approach to learning as opposed to somebody who's been on the cutting edge of an industry and where they've had to survive by their wits and their creativity, as opposed to just reporting, doing the 9 to 5 or whatever? Is there any noticeable different and the challenge?
My experience is that the capability and the joy of asking great questions is a universal. That, as we mentioned earlier, every child, every 2-year-old child, 3-year-old child in the world loves to ask questions. They enjoy coming up with a great question that stumps their parents or colleagues or whatever it would be. But when they go into the workplace, whether it's the public sector or the private sector, whether it's in Mauritius or in Argentina or Brazil or whatever, people are discouraged from asking questions. And so when in this particular recognition that the great learnings and great change occurs from questions, you bring a group together, initially they have a little bit of difficulty in getting comfortable with questions in the workplace. They ask questions continuously in their home life and with their best friends, but in the workplace they don't feel comfortable, they don't know how to ask questions. So as Val indicated, in the action learning, we make it a kind of a norm that statements can be made only in response to questions. So everybody starts stumbling in the first 5 or 10 minutes, but my experience, corporate or public, nonprofit, academic, anywhere in the world, after about 10 or 15 minutes, it's such an inherent part of all human beings. I get just as great questions from a public sector and just as quick a question from the public sector as I do from the private sector, whether it be in Dominica, United States, or Germany.
So it's a matter of... Because here we are in Dominica, as opposed to, I mean, I look at all the places you've been, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Egypt, and so forth. Culture, whether it be religious culture, where people are, encouraged to behave in a certain way, to believe certain things out of just pure, the power of the teacher and who is the institution. The church is extremely important and vital and powerful. What part does that play? I'm sure it keeps coming up. Yes. And how does that assist or present a challenge?
And I think Mike will have a take on that as well. But what I think it would if your culture doesn't encourage the asking of questions, then that would dampen it. If the organization itself has a culture that doesn't encourage that, then it's not going to fly anywhere. And that's why, Mike will say how he does it elsewhere, but I think if you do it in an organization, you have to involve the top, so that the top gets into the mode of asking questions, help to make that a norm so that everybody everywhere else within the organization can do it. And I think once you mix and match the different levels, and then people say, yeah, it's okay to ask questions, and once you get results and rewarded for asking questions, I think that will persist. But that's my take, Mike. I don't know how you...
Yes, I think culture does determine how we behave. We're very familiar with that. And certainly there's national cultures that cause some cultures to be more comfortable in asking questions and challenging and taking risks, and other cultures be less so. Certain corporations and government agencies that may support it, not support it. So for great learning to occur and great development of human beings and great ideas, you have to have a culture which encourages questions. And so what happens with action learning and the work I do is that in this particular room, we have a different culture than may exist outside that door or outside that building in that culture, a national culture. And so in this room, we have a norm in which everyone is expected and encouraged to ask questions. And when people have that as a norm and begin having success with it, they naturally enjoy it once they're into it. Then the questions emerge. But we have created a microculture that is different than the culture of the national.
The reason I raise it is that how many parents have I heard say, man, you know, since my children started watching television and they see those little kids with those smart aleck responses and asking questions of their parents, and who do these kids think they are? You know what I mean? I'm in charge here, I'm the parent and so on. But the children, after how many years of exposure, there's a whole generation now of persons who think it is their right, and in fact it's their privilege to ask a question. And but the parents, many parents, as they say, shut up. You're to be seen and not heard. You will speak when you're spoken to.
Yes. No. And unfortunately, even some teachers cannot deal with the constant questioning.
Yeah. I raise this because, you know, both in the corporate world and in the public world and the non-profit world, of which I'm a part, we want performance, we want productivity. It's very competitive, whether we're seeking grants, funding, or whether you're seeking customership as a bank and so on. Let's place these kind of little indicators and aims and goals, performance, you know, be competitive, you know, get the results, you know, be productive, be punctual, you know, and that kind of stuff. Is this helping to build a culture at the workplace that makes these things the norm? And how does that get translated to the greater society? And is there a different process? How does that process become engaged?
Well, I think the intent when you're trying to do a human development in an organization, you're trying to come up with great strategies, you're working with a limited number of people who are available and who is assigned to come up with actions to these problems. Action learning is always built around having an urgent problem or goal. Yeah. So you have this group that you hope have changed their behavior. They've changed their values. And if you truly believe in what's working for you, then you tend to start spreading it to your fellow workers that you may supervise or in your family. And so it's been my experience that people who experience this form of action learning and these results start using it on an ongoing basis because it's so natural and comfortable. Right now, most of us, when we are with our best friends and having a conversation, all we do is ask each other questions. You know, what do you think of the cricket match? Did you watch that show? How are your children doing? What are you going to do next month? We do it all the time because it's enjoyable. Our best friends are people whom we like to ask questions of, and we like them to ask questions. None of us have a close friend who does not ask us a question.
I may venture a slightly different view and ask you to react to it. If you listen to conversations among friends, they're not asking questions. They're basically telling their friend what it is. I'm telling you that this guy got out because. Don't tell me, you know, and whether it's politics or religion or cricket or football, there's a more, at least in the Caribbean culture, our discussions tend to be very insistent discussions of various positions rather than...
Yeah, but if that was the only conversation, I would suspect you would not want to be with that person who's continually lecturing at you.
Well,
of course, in a conversation with friends, you're going to have strong opinions. You ask, well, what do you think of that, and so forth. But my experience, and it's kind of a universal phenomenon, and it's not... It's a biological and physiological element, as sociological, is that we tend to like people who give us an opportunity to help them.
To have a seat,
We like people who give us the opportunity of shining in front of them. And when you ask me a question, you ask, well, what do you think of my advice? That gives me an opportunity to shine. You give me an opportunity of helping me or of allowing me to help you. And when you think of your most satisfying relationships or what's made you most happy in life, it was when you were able to help someone else because that person gave you the opportunity. And usually they do it through some form of a question, a request.
Of course. We're at the halfway mark. Hold that point. We're going to come back because also I want us to think about how we apply some of this wonderful thing that I know by a different name actually to this big enterprise, this big venture we call democracy, which is out for and by, which requires engagement, requires listening, questioning and so forth. Democracy in the workplace, how does that get translated to democracy in a greater society? Very fascinating. We're going to invite you to call and join Michael and Vaughn after the break for a word from the sponsors because they make the program possible. We'll be right back.
Increased local programming on Marpin's Channel 5. Tune in daily from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. for local and regional cuisine, arts, entertainment, talk shows, comedy, news and current affairs, plus your favorite programs from our archives. Marpin, programming with you in mind.
Okay, we're back and we're going to go right into it. You can call and join this conversation. Dial 500-8000, 500-8000, 500-8000, and you'll join Michael and Mr. Mourillon. 2 M's actually. I'm not going to say the first M. Actually, 3 M's.
3 M's.
Right, my goodness. But Ron, you were going to make a point before we took the break.
Yes. In the first segment, just before we rounded up, you asked whether how does action learning help productivity, time, and all of those things. Now, obviously, the people involved directly, that there would be an impact. But if an organization, for example, determined that productivity was a significant problem, significant in the sense that it's affecting their achieving the goals that they have set, what you could do with the process is have an action learning group process that problem, and by the very processing it through action learning, they will take the steps, because it requires them to make a change. And once you get that critical mass going, then you can spread it throughout the organization, or you can do it for any problem, whether it's punctuality, whatever the problem is. You know? So I don't know, that was how I figured it could be used.
Absolutely. Okay, let's go back to the world that we are living in. There's a conference going on, a big UN meeting going on in New York right now.
Yes.
You know, General Assembly, they're focusing on the global financial crisis and global warming. Two issues that somebody's out there trying to convince the world that these are two really critical issues. Mr. Ban Ki-moon is saying there's nothing more important. Is he asking the right questions? Is the UN over the years and even today finding the right ways to get people to learn about those new issues and to embrace them, focus on them, corporations to do that? Is that happening? And if it is, why do you think? If it's not, what would you suggest?
Well, I think the UN and many nations are looking at the right issues.
Okay.
I'm not sure if they're using the right approach.
Okay.
Often an individual or a group of people feel they have the right answer, and so they try to impose that answer, which may in fact be correct, on someone who has a differing view. And so the belief is that I can convince you with enough information, enough facts, and then you will come to my side of the issue, whether it's environmental warming or the situation in Palestine or whatever. We tend to, both sides come in with the intent of trying to convince the other side through information, debate, and so forth. And we realize that does not change individuals, it does not change nations. The way people change is being asked about a issue, and what do you see in that issue? Do you see my side? People tend, if given the opportunity, saying, can you see the other side in an open way, then people tend to hear it. I oftentimes use the example when I work with a group that most of us, when we go to a restaurant and we're with a group of people, 3 of us were served in a restaurant, we get a beer, and you put the pitcher in the middle of the table, and when our glass gets low, we grab the pitcher and fill our beer because we take care of ourselves. Whereas in, say, the Japanese culture, you would never ever consider filling your glass because everyone around the table is watching your glass, and you in turn watch everyone else's glass. And so we tend to, if you work and you're trying to fill the other person's glass, you tend to get your glass filled. And so in action learning, if I ask you, why do you think this would work, or how could you help me, or what do you see, you're more likely to ask from my perspective.
Of course.
And we tend to hear what we ask for. We tend to deflect, reject what we do not ask for. And so if you tell me global warming is good, I did not ask for it, I will reject it, deflect it, and give you all the reasons why you're wrong. But if you ask me, do you see what might be causing global warming, or could you tell me why you do not think the Earth is warming? Then we tend to
have a conversation.
Most political bodies believe the way you change people, the way you get votes, is through the wind, pushing people through debate or information rather than opening them up to the sun, in a sense. And when people don't feel pressured, then they tend to be a little bit more open to the possibility that there may be some other truth than their own.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the platform for conversation, for learning, and for team building. And it leads me to the question, I didn't want to leave it till the end. This issue of leadership that you raised earlier, but then the issue of the action learning that seems to encourage the sprouting of leaders. So you have a whole group of leaders rather than a leader. Let's talk a little bit about that and how important it is to cultivate that whole little cluster of leaders, and what difference will it make in a work situation, in a corporate or public sector situation?
What I see is well, definitely you're right. In the action learning setting, everybody gets to lead. I mean, everybody develops leadership skills. As a matter of fact, that's one of the targets. That's what would make people want to be in this, because hopefully at the end of it, they feel that they've grown. Now, in the current environment where things are changing rapidly, the problems we have to face are complex, you really want in your organization people exercising leadership roles at every level, wherever they are in the organization, doing those leadership things that would make things happen, that would please the customer better, that would give an up in productivity, that would make a process, less wasteful, that sort of thing. So it's critical. I don't know, Mike.
Yeah, but so in a sense, so that's what makes it a little more familiar to people, that in fact it's okay for me to make a suggestion. It's okay for me to ask even of the perceived general manager, leader, a question, to ask why, so I understand. But then doesn't it require a reciprocation? So in a sense, the general manager has not got to see this as insubordination, but so much as part of your learning process. Okay.
Yes.
I'm kind of repeating my understanding of it, so that the viewers see that if I can get it, you can get it.
And we're realizing that the great leaders of the world, whether they're spiritual leaders, political leaders, economic leaders, are those who ask great questions. And that in today's environment, the more and more leaders recognize that they're going to be a better leader. They're going to encourage people around them to be, more competent, to be more inspired through questions. And you can demonstrate it fairly quickly. If I'm with a group of people and I tell the group, do this, I have some control over that. But if I ask that group a great question that gets them all to reflect on my question, I have much more control over them. And getting them not only to use my idea, but ideas that I might not even have considered in my question. So great leaders ask great questions.
But that turns the definition of leader on its head, doesn't it? And how does the process treat with that period of transition from, okay, this is the leader thing we have now, getting it over here? How could you tell us about a situation where you've seen that transformation take place, maybe with some very strong leadership persons and maybe some persons who were sleepers? How does that unfold?
Well, even here with the National Bank of Dominica, I was very impressed with the top leadership of the bank and the managing director, and how quickly all of them began asking questions of each other, asking better and better questions, and the group felt they came up with some great ideas for a very critical problem they were facing. And the leader helped to build the team through the questions that he asked. So, but it is a difficult challenge because most people feel they can maintain control and maintain their power and their status through the use of statements. And it's ironic, but it's just the opposite. When a leader asks his or her colleague or subordinate for help, that person actually admires that person more and wants to be led, and more than when someone is just giving them directions what to do.
We have been searching for a while for quote-unquote, indicators or criteria for things, aspects of leadership that we glibly refer to as good and accountable. The business of holding leaders accountable. But it's that seems to not arise if you have restructured people's idea of leadership, because it's the group that has to be accountable. It's the team that has to be accountable, and not one individual. Is that kind of extending the learning and applying it appropriately?
Yeah. Well, in my view, it is. I mean, you have roles and people within the thing, but the group really has control, because once they follow the ground rules, any member of this team can call to order based on the ground rules. Okay. So that way, I think they're held jointly and severally accountable for the outcome. I
think also leaders have always been accountable for the success of their department or their organization. And so we weren't concerned about their style as long as their department or organization reached success. Okay. What leaders are now realizing, I can get much greater results by using a style of questioning and enabling the people around me to develop, as opposed to doing it all by myself. 20 years ago, an individual leader could, by himself or herself, help the organization or department be successful. Now it's not possible. Okay. The leader has to use questions to get the entire group to reach success.
Going back to the large number of countries you've worked in, have you found any countries where this was already the way they did business? Or close to it?
Yeah, it's interesting. Some cultures, you have a lot more questioning from the individuals who are taking risks and who take initiative. And other cultures where they work very effectively in groups, but they don't ask questions, they wait for direction. So my experience is that no culture naturally does all of these things, or culturally does all of them things. They do it naturally, but not culturally. But all within a relatively short period of time would overcome the cultural barriers and begin to operate in what I think is a universal way of utilizing the best resources around that problem at that particular time.
What I'm seeing here is that you're going to have to rewrite the manuals for doing assessments and evaluations of your staff, because what would actually have gotten a high score before, after this kind of exercise, a whole new set of criteria begin to come to play.
Well, an important part of most organizations, when they do assess someone, they assess you on what you have performed over the past 6 months or past year. Right. You know, what kind of sales you've had, or what kind of morale you have in your staff, or a number of errors, whatever it may be. Now more and more organizations recognize the most valuable contribution you make as a leader or a member of the group. What have you learned over the past 6 months that can be used by the rest of the organization? Okay. Because learning has a multiplier effect and a long-term effect, whereas your performance might be good this 6 months, but you may in fact have created an environment that causes
I think
failure.
we have our first caller. Good evening, caller. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, good evening, Happy. This is Ronnie.
Hey, Ronnie, what's up, man?
I'm good.
Excellent.
Hi, a few thoughts here.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I do some work in that area.
That's right. Another HR person.
I'm wondering how this discussion could make sense to those of us who make more sense to those of us who are listening. And I'm thinking about the objective reality of the business environment in Dominica. Okay. Where we have very few public companies. We have a lot of privately owned companies. All right, so I'm thinking about that. And Mr. Mourillon mentioned the involvement of the leadership in this whole process, and how important it is for us to distinguish the passion for the job in the worker versus the adversities that may result when you begin to ask questions. All right, and I'm hearing the action learning being made reference to in terms of problem solving, in terms of change management, team building, and the development of leadership. Right. Very critical is the development of the customer service behaviors in the employees, for example, at the bank, right? So maybe it might make more sense to me and those listening if we could hear a little bit more about the rules of engagement in the model. When you come together as a team and you're asking the questions, what are some of the ground rules that are operative in that discussion? So
okay,
thanks.
Thank you for that. Cool. Did you get the question?
Got parts of it, yes.
You're free to respond to that. I guess he's make it more real, more practical.
What does a session look like?
What is a session? How do you get it going? Could we just kind of a schematic kind of run through?
There are 6 elements that are required for a successful action learning, which optimizes both the ideas, strategies, actions, as well as the learning, and 2 ground rules. So to have a powerful action learning project, you have to start out with an urgent problem or task.
Okay.
Second, you have a group of no more than 8 people and no fewer than 4 people. Ideally, people with different perspectives, because the greater the diversity of the group, the more creative it will be. The third element is that while the group is working, they focus on asking questions of each other and learning from each other rather than telling each other what to do. The fourth component is that the group knows they have to come up with action. They're going to be accountable. There's expectation. At the end of every session, there will be actions taken by everyone in the group, which will be identified by the group.
All right.
A fifth element is that every group member knows when they arrive that they are here for 2 purposes. One is to come up with great breakthrough ideas for this problem, and 2, they have to all learn as individuals and as a team. The recognition being that the smarter we become as a team, the quicker and better we solve the problem. So each of us are accountable to develop our leadership skills, develop our ability to work as a team. And the 6th component is that a member of the group is focusing on helping the group improve its learning and performance. So there's power given to this person called the coach, the action learning coach, who will occasionally intervene to help the group improve its performance, recognize its learning, and develop leadership skills. Because there's a direct correlation. The smarter the group, the better the strategies, the quicker the strategies.
You mentioned 2 ground rules. What are those?
The 2 ground rules is the first ground rule is that when you're working in a group, statements can be made only in response to questions. So anyone can ask a question of anyone at any point. A question might generate 5, 10, 15 minutes of response. Or if it's a great question, people will just be thinking about it. But in order to participate in the interaction or dialogue, you are either answering a question or asking a question. And the second ground rule is that we give power to the action learning coach. So when he leans forward, the group stops working on the task for that moment of time, listens to the questions of the coach that helps them identify what they could do better and where they are in terms of their strategies and so forth. And then, after the coach has asked his questions, they return back to the task. And the coach has the power to be sure there's learning, and the questions are sure that there's learning.
So in a sense, the coach is like the old-style leader.
Well,
who has the power, but his power is directed at extracting, at developing a change process.
Right. The coach is given that power because he or she is not involved in the problem. So you are, as a member of the group, you're comfortable in giving the coach the power to help you improve, and to be sure the time is managed so at the end you have both the action and learning. I like to describe the action learning coach as a servant leader who is only there to make sure the group succeeds, but has to be sure that he does his leadership role when he is given the opportunity. So you do have that power, but it's only to help the group. It's like a spiritual person has power, not to tell them what to do, but to give them the ability to do what's best for them.
So it's not power that's going to be used to accumulate more power, accumulate wealth, accumulate control.
But one thing I think Mike mentioned along the way is the need for diversity in the group, and I think I want to emphasize that because sometimes if you have a problem that looks a particular way, you feel what you need is to get experts in that field only to sit down. And what they do, they all ask the same questions that they've asked all the time, and they all know the answers, and they come up. If you throw in a guy here who knows nothing about the technical field, he will ask these questions that nobody had thought about before, because nobody dared for different reasons. I don't know, Mike, if you want to deal with that, because that is one of the things that fascinated me. You don't necessarily have to be the expert. You have to have somebody in the group who knows a little something about it. But all the members need not be, and it's better if they're not all from the same field.
And we know enough about problem solving and management that the more complex a problem is, the more difficult it is, the less valuable is expertise, and the more valuable is diversity.
You should repeat that quite often.
Yeah. and so bringing in some outside, but the fact that you bring in different people, and it only helps you solve a difficult problem, but you start breaking down silos, you start bringing in people, you start respecting, gee, that engineer is a pretty good guy after all. He really did help us. So there's many, many benefits of each of the elements of action learning and how it changes the organization, because the more you change the culture of the organization, the more one can practice better leadership skills and better team skills.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, I like that term, a sleeper, because in fact, you may have somebody who is an engineer, but who also loves calypso music.
Yeah, right.
And in fact, at a particular point in the process, a very popular line of a calypso may just be the thing to bring...
Get the
excitement going and so on. So,
exactly.
Ronnie, I think thanks for your question, because you allowed us to sort of make it real. And if you wish, please call back, Ronnie. I know you're very, very interested in that. I know time is running fairly quickly. That's why I appear to be rushing, but I'm trying to ask you some questions that I think people like Ronnie would have wanted to ask. I want to go back a little bit to something that I know seems to present a challenge to a lot of managers. I don't know if you are confronting that already, Ron. The tendency for people to resort to a Google search or any other search to find an answer for something. And I'm seeing it a lot in the students, people who are even at the master's level, think that basically they can find an answer. How does that attitude towards learning get, fixed, adjusted, addressed through the action learning? Because you have a ubiquitous tool.
Well, I think we recognize in the work life that it's very rare that you fully understand the problem initially. So if you say, this is the problem, I need to find an answer to it, you oftentimes are getting an answer to a symptom or perhaps the wrong thing. So the most important skill in the real life, whether you're a parent or a manager, is to be sure you get to the right question. And that requires asking questions first about the symptom or issue in front of you. And if you ask the right questions, then you get to the real question, the root question. And then once you have that, then you need to go to search where you get the quick best answer. But if you go quickly to the answer, you're oftentimes going to, what we call efficient but not effective. You're doing the wrong thing very well.
Absolutely.
So the most important skill, and we do at George Washington University in our executive doctoral program, we have doctoral students from all over the world, senior executives. We tell them at the beginning of the program, we hope you have more questions at the end of your degree than you do at the beginning. If so, then we've been a good university for you.
Absolutely.
One of the and you're coming back to the Google thing. One of the participants going out this afternoon, I was saying, well, how are things going? He said, it's taking a lot of time, but it reminds me of a saying that you measure 10 times and you cut once. But when you cut that once, you're more likely to cut accurately. So in other words, and I think what Mike is saying, if you think this is a problem and you went off and Googled it, all that stuff you got may not be what's solving the real problem that will make the difference. But
Absolutely.
if you did the process before, then Google might help, because then you'll be better able to sift the winning solutions.
The preliminary step to the right question is thought, is thinking. Now, sometimes a question can tell you that people are thinking. Because if the right question, the deep question. Any other indicators or signs that people are thinking? Because that's a question I get asked a lot by managers and owners of, let's say, companies that I do work for. Say, this is really good stuff, but how come my people not thinking about this? You know, thinking. How do we get people thinking so that they get to the right question? It's not an inspirational thing, the right question.
I think that people tend to do that which they get rewarded for. And we tend to reward people for answers or for statements. We don't reward people for asking questions. But we're recognizing, so if we encouraged our colleagues or staff, on Monday morning, I want each of you to come with a great question that will help us, guide us for this week or this month. They will come up with great questions. They have the ability, but they tend to do what they get rewarded for. And so organizations start and leaders start recognizing people who ask great questions. And just to go back to the childhood, most parents get quite frustrated with their children asking so many questions.
Sure.
So they punish them for asking questions. Stop asking questions. You're embarrassing me. You're wearing me down. So they realize to maintain a good relationship with the parent is to not ask questions, make statements. So one of the most important things a grandparent does is to undo what their parents do to their children. So I tell my grandchildren, when you see Grandpa, come up with your best question.
Absolutely.
And so I'm trying to reward my grandchildren and encourage them to ask questions.
Wonderful, wonderful. Now, I know there's somebody in this studio who's actually very, very thankful for that input. We have less than 5 minutes left. I want to leave that time for you guys, because one, I'm really interested in what is it you expect for the bank out of this program? And Michael, for you, what would you say to somebody who's not participating in this program that might spark an interest in this approach to learning?
Yeah. Well, no, I expect a number of things for the bank. In the first stage, we dealt with 5 real-life problems. So I expect that those will lead to strategies that will improve what we do in different areas.
Okay.
I also expect that people will learn the methodology and be able to use it again. That's another one, and then the leadership. And somehow, because in the process we have skipped rank and we've mixed all levels. I'm hoping that will lead to a slight shift in the culture where people will realize that your thinking can come from any level. You know, once it's done within a certain environment of respect, that we really value contributions no matter what level. You may have just joined the organization 2 weeks ago, you may be at the bottom rung of the organization in terms of pay, but that your ideas, we still want them and they're valuable. We are hoping also that it has challenged some of the people who are aspiring to higher levels of leadership within the organization, to fine-tune those skills and to probably use this new approach, which we hope would make us better able to navigate the complexity and the uncertainties out there. You know?
Mike, you have 1 minute for your closing comments.
I think we have some very clear targets for the National Bank of Dominica. We wish to increase profits by a significant margin. We wish to change the culture of the organization. We wish to build great leaders. And so we have very high targets. I've been very impressed with the quality of people at the National Bank of Dominica, and very pleased. I have no doubt that the action learning process and the urgent problems that have been identified will result in some great activities.
On that note, we want to thank Michael and Vaughn and the National Bank for making this conversation possible, but most important, making it possible for us to share it with you. I think all of us, parents, grandparents, and others, would have actually found something of use in this conversation, because we all are leaders in our own rights. Because we have to pick and choose the moments when that leadership power is being exercised. So let me thank you two guys for coming here, making this possible. And for you out there, especially the students and the parents, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.